Welcome to part 3 of our Umpqua Lighthouse trip. This time we visit the gift shop, the museum, and the lighthouse. The gift shop and the museum are in old U.S. Coast Guard buildings that were built in 1939. The gift shop was in the repair area. The bay doors you saw were actually bay doors for them to open up and work on some of the boats that they used for rescue. It was a cute little gift shop, had a lot of little knickknacks in there, and this is where we actually bought the tickets for the tour of the lighthouse itself. They had all kinds of neat little things to look at. Then it was on to the museum. This was actually a recovery boat. Doesn't look like much, but our guide told us that that hull on that ship is filled with 2,000 pounds of ballast, and that helped to make it a self-righting vessel. If they got out in the waves and the rescue boat got turned over, it would self-right itself in the water. Just seems counterintuitive to me to add 2,000 pounds to a boat you want to float, but it worked. The museum was really neat. It had a lot of history of not only the lighthouse and the Coast Guard buildings here, but how the Coast Guard kind of came into being. There was a ship offshore that was in distress, and just some local men grabbed a vessel and rowed it out to the boat or the ship that was in trouble and rescued the folks off of it, and that was kind of the start of it. Initially, it was all volunteers. That short little clip you saw of the other lighthouse, that's not the lighthouse we're going to go look at. The original lighthouse here at Umpqua was actually built down by the mouth of the river, and it was built in 1857. And it had its own difficulties, and it went through two different floods, one in 1861 and another in 1863. And these two floods were severe enough that it really undermined the foundation of the original lighthouse. Early in 1864, it was decommissioned, and some very nervous workers had to crawl up into the now leaning lighthouse and recover the 2,000-pound Fresnel lens out of it. And if I recall correctly, it was literally either the next day or just days after they got the Fresnel lens out of the old lighthouse, it collapsed. Interestingly, it was almost 30 years later that they finally built the current lighthouse. It was built in 1890. This is the upstairs of the museum building, and it had different displays. I thought it was kind of neat that each room they had set up differently with different eras, 1950s, 1960s, etc., showing you kind of the differences in uniform or cots or equipment that would have been used during that time. Each one unique in its own way. Really well done displays. Very informative museum. We really enjoyed walking around it and reading all the things they had there. The history of the Coast Guard, the history of the lighthouse, the history of the area. Also amazing to me that a building built in 1939 is still in really good shape. It's been really well maintained, and the guide that took us to the lighthouse said that all the windows still open and close, and all the doors still work, and everything still functions. Pretty impressive for a building that's that old. It's almost 90 years old. Then it was on to the lighthouse itself. This lighthouse is 65 feet tall, and it's one of them that's the furthest back from the actual beach on the Oregon coast. And again, this one was built in 1890. As you can see by the fence, it is fenced off. You have to pay for a tour, and the whole area around it is actually an active U.S. Coast Guard station. So all those buildings you see around the lighthouse, people actually live in and work in, and that's one of the reasons why it's fenced off. The stairs in this lighthouse are really cool. They're all cast iron, and they were put together as the outer wall was being built. And if you notice and look really close, the outside of the stairs do not contact the outer wall. You have the various landings where they put in steel I-beams for that section, but the stairs themselves free float next to the wall. They're not connected to the wall itself, and that was just for extra strength for the outer wall of the lighthouse. The actual light is really cool. This one has two white and a red continuously. And there's 616 glass prisms in that first order Fresnel lens. And that lens weighs 2 tons. It's a lot of weight. Our guide was really informed and really fun to listen to, had a lot of information about it, the lighthouse itself, and kind of noticed that it almost looks like the inner walls have been painted white and then scraped off. It's because they were. Someone thought it was a good idea to paint the inside of the lighthouse, and then knowledgeable lighthouse keepers came in later and says, nope, you got to scrape all that off, because the unpainted brick actually allows moisture to go in and out, and if you paint it, then it seals the moisture in and can cause more problems and decay. Then we spent that evening watching the sun go down while we sat and observed the lighthouse. You can kind of see the light beams bouncing off the trees around the lighthouse, and our guide told us that the light from this lighthouse can be seen 20 miles out to sea. That's impressive. It was really neat. When it really got dark, you could just see the lights just dancing off the trees behind it. 2 white and a red, 2 white and a red. Each lighthouse has its own signature of light so that the sailors could see it and know which one they were near. Then the drive home. We ended up coming home a day earlier because we were watching the news, and the news was saying that Friday was really supposed to be hit hard with the wintry white stuff. So we opted to go home on Thursday, and as you can see, there was still a lot of snow. Thankfully, it was warm enough. The roads were pretty much just wet. And after we got home, we were paying attention to the traffic cameras up on the pass, and we talked to a gal that drove over the pass on Friday, and she said for several miles up near the peak, it was near whiteout conditions. The roads were terrible. They had seen like 3 or 4 jackknife semis, so I'm glad we went home early. Well, thanks a lot for coming along. We'll see you on the next adventure.